everyone. Thanks for watching my vlog, A Dose of Reason. I'm Dr. Shira Doron, an infectious disease physician and the hospital epidemiologist at Tufts Medical Center in Boston. Every week, I look forward to answering your questions about the COVID-19 pandemic and sharing my thoughts on the latest news and scientific updates and breakthroughs so you can make the best health and safety decisions for you and your family. You can send me your questions to adoseofreason@tuftsmedicalcenter.org. Please include your first name and hometown with your question. I'll pick a few questions each week to discuss in the vlog. It seems there's never a dull moment in COVID land. Since last week, there have been a number of developments. Moderna announced that its 2-dose pediatric vaccine study of children ages 6 months through 5 years was successful. It showed that the lower dose 2-shot series produced antibody levels equivalent to that of young adults and was safe. Surprisingly, because the study wasn't designed to show this, but because of the massive Omicron wave, there were enough infections in the participants to show a statistically significant decrease in infection rate between the vaccine and placebo groups, hovering around 40%. Now that may not sound like a lot, but we know that the vaccines are no longer as effective at preventing infection in the face of Omicron. And we also know that even when prevention of infection isn't great, prevention of severe disease is. The FDA authorized a 4th dose of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for individuals over the age of 50, and an additional booster, which is a 5th dose, for people who are moderately to severely immunocompromised. The CDC, in turn, recommended 4th doses for those over 65 and those over 50 with medical conditions. And they recommended that people who got 2 doses of J&J get a 3rd dose with Pfizer or Moderna. The FDA also announced that in certain states, including Massachusetts, they need to stop administering the monoclonal antibody sotrovimab, which was a mainstay of therapy during the Omicron surge, because of presumed reduced efficacy against the BA.2 subvariant that's based on laboratory data. Luckily, we now have a new monoclonal called bebtelovimab, which, again, in the laboratory looks like it will work well against BA.2. And right now we have plentiful supply of that and the other therapies, IV remdesivir and the oral agents Paxlovid and molnupiravir. Our first question comes from Connor from Burlington. Now that the FDA has approved a 2nd booster shot for adults over 50, is there any downside at all to get one? Well, maybe. Let me start by saying that the mRNA vaccines are extremely safe, especially for people over 50, where the one adverse event of real concern, myocarditis or heart inflammation, really doesn't occur. And in an Israeli preprint study, not yet peer-reviewed, with over 500,000 participants aged 60 and above, mortality was significantly lower in those who had received a 4th dose of Pfizer compared to those who had received a 3rd dose at least 4 months earlier. In another Israeli preprint, looking at over 1 million people over the age of 60, infection was reduced 2-fold and severe illness 4-fold after a 4th dose as compared to a 3rd. So what could be the downsides? Well, that in the next few months, and before you might be eligible for another dose if you take one now, one or both of 2 things could happen. A variant-specific booster or otherwise better formulation of vaccine could be approved, maybe, or that cases could surge higher at some point in the future, just as efficacy of this next booster is wearing off. And I don't really have a solution to those problems or a suggestion, except to say that the older you are and the more medical problems, the more benefit you probably get from taking the 4th dose sooner rather than later. The second question comes from Emma from Plymouth. With last week's announcement that Moderna will seek FDA approval for its COVID vaccine for children under 5, are we finally coming to the end of this agonizingly long wait to protect our youngest kids from this terrible virus? It was very good news that the Moderna trial for children under the age of 6 was a success. It will take a little time for them to file their request for authorization, and then, even though it's not the fastest way, I do hope that the FDA convenes its external advisory panel, the VRBPAC, and that the CDC's advisory committee, ACIP, meets as well. Those public meetings are where the country's top experts discuss all of the data and hash out things like exactly how to word the official recommendation. And those meetings are where pediatricians get in-depth, nuanced information with which to talk to families. Now, I think that the FDA will authorize the vaccine for all children in that age group, regardless of underlying medical condition, but one can never be 100% sure. So I'll remind you that although way too many children have gotten sick and died from COVID-19, unvaccinated children are still statistically safer than even vaccinated adults because of the steep age gradient this disease has as far as severity. I'm putting on the screen the cumulative death rate per 100,000 in Massachusetts by age as an example of that. The last question came from Ava from Uxbridge. With almost all of the focus on COVID-19, I haven't seen much attention to the fact that flu cases are rising across the country, even as we head into April. Is this something to keep an eye on, or is it likely to fizzle out once the warmer spring weather arrives? Flu cases are rising in Massachusetts and across the country, and this would normally be the time when it would be fizzling out, but it's doing the opposite. I don't know if the warm weather will turn it around, but I hope so. We know that the swine flu pandemic arrived here in the spring and had no problem raging throughout the summer, but that was partly because the population had so little immunity to it. Now, the population has waning immunity against flu from not having a flu season last year, but hopefully that won't impact things to result in a huge spike. That's the last thing we need. Please, if you haven't done so, get your flu shot. That's all the time we have for this week. You can send me your questions about the Omicron stealth subvariant, how spikes elsewhere may impact us in the weeks to come, or anything related to the pandemic or infectious diseases to a dose of reason at tuftsmedicalcenter.org. I look forward to dishing out a dose of reason to you again next week.